What's up guys, I got a brand new video for you today, and these are the top 10 reasons why the A7IV is actually a really good upgrade over the A7 III, and why you might want to get this camera despite all the negative comments I've seen on the A7 IV. And I want to address some of those things in this video because I think that this actually is a good upgrade and why I pre-ordered the camera. I'm hearing stuff like
Sony cripple hammer, no full frame, 4K 60, 6 frames per second uncompressed RAW, low resolution screen and stuff like that.
And why those things are holding this camera back. Anyway, from the top, number 10, the build quality. The A7 IV is overall a beefier, better built camera, and it doesn't feel any heavier than the A7 III. Even though the body is thicker and the grip is bigger, it does fit the hand way nicer. And when I'm talking about build quality, I'm talking about things like the reinforced hot shoe and things like that. Like on the A7 III, mine cracked due to having weight and stress put on it from like the Ninja 5, and I actually had to super glue this back together in place so that the data pins would actually still work with the hot shoe with my flashes. Also the door flaps on the camera, they're a nice soft rubber on the hinges, and it seals really nicely. The weather sealing's way better than the A7 III versus the old plastic clips that just kind of hung on for dear life and flipped around, and they always bent and broke. Yeah, it's just a way better build camera. Number 9, the articulating touchscreen. This new screen is way better. It's one of the complaints I had on the A7 III for a long time is that the screen was bad, the colors weren't accurate, and sometimes it looked like your shots were overexposed when they weren't. But this new screen is much better, the colors are more vibrant, things are a little bit more sharper, and I love that you have touch in the menus now where the A7 III only has touch to focus. I've heard people complain that it's a low res screen, but honestly it's pretty good. It's obviously not super high res, but overall it's way better than the A7 III, and that also goes for the EVF. The EVF is actually a lot nicer and has 120 frames per second refresh rate. Number 8, the sensor dust cover, and this is something I think that was added in the A1. And so now you can have the shutter come down and cover the sensor when the lens is off. And this is super useful because dust is always getting on these sensors. But there is a warning. When you enable this feature, you can't leave your camera lens off if you're in the bright area. Like if you were in the sun, there's a potential that it could turn it into a magnifying glass and it would burn a hole through the shutter blades. And that's something you don't really want to happen. Number 7, the full-size HDMI. And this is a really nice upgrade. The A7 III has a micro HDMI port, and while that seems to be the norm on a lot of cameras, it's not very durable. It's easy to bend and break. And a lot of A7 cameras I know out there, they've had that problem where the HDMI broke off in the camera. So this just makes more sense. It makes it more of a professional camera. It's a lot more of a beefy built port, and this is going to hold up way better. Number 6, the video codecs and bit rates. The A7 III is limited to 4K 24 and 30p 8-bit 420, and this usually isn't an issue if you know how to properly expose your image and you don't need slow motion in 4K, but the big issue is for me when it comes to color grading and how much you can push the image around in post. And that's where the A7 IV shines with the 4K 24, 30, and 60p 10-bit 422. You've got higher bitrate options and better codecs, and it's just more versatile for color grading and pushing the image around in post before it breaks apart, and it makes way more sense to shoot S-Log3 now, and you're also going to get more dynamic range. But the caveat is that in 4K 60p, the camera crops into Super 35. So hear me out. Would you rather have line skipped or pixel binned 4K 60 with really bad rolling shutter and it be full frame? Or would you rather have full pixel readout, less rolling shutter, but shoot Super 35? Clearly the full readout is going to give you a better image, and I think that's what Sony chose to do. And my assumption is that in order to keep the price competitive, the sensor they use just doesn't have that fast of a readout. It's not like their expensive stacked sensor that they put in the A1. Yeah, the A7S III can also do 4K 60, but it's only 12 megapixels, and so it doesn't have to push as much data through. And so to keep the cost down, that's just what they had to do. Like if you want full frame 4K 60, like a high resolution camera, you're gonna have to get the A1. Number 5, stabilization. The A7 III has standard in-body stabilization, and it's alright, whereas the A7 IV has standard as well as active stabilization and adds a small crop on top of the IBIS, just using digital stabilization. But this camera also has one more trick up its sleeve, and it's using gyro stabilization in post, and you can do that with Catalyst Browse. You can use the gyro metadata that's recorded at the time of filming, and then you can go back and stabilize it after in post, and it looks amazing. I'm always blown away by how good it looks. And then that brings me to the rolling shutter. I'd say the rolling shutter isn't any worse than the A7 III, it's just not any better. And I think that's what people are getting hung up on, and I've shot lots of stuff that looks great on the A7 III, so I'm not too worried about the A7 IV. Number 4, the buffer speed. So the A7 III can shoot up to 10 frames per second, and so can the A7 IV, but when you're shooting uncompressed RAW, the A7 IV is actually slower. It's going to slow it down to like 6 to 7 frames per second, but if you shoot compressed RAW, it's going to do 10 frames per second for a really long time. It's got a really good buffer in it, but I see people complaining that it's a huge downgrade because the A7 III can shoot 10 frames per second uncompressed RAW. But what you aren't thinking about is how fast the buffer fills up on the A7 III. So when you hit the limit on the A7 III, it's almost unusable. It like partially locks up, only lets you shoot like 1 frame per second while it's writing to the card. Whereas on the A7 IV, it's gonna keep allowing you to do little bursts, like 3 to 4 frames per second. And even if you let off for like 2 or 3 seconds, the buffer's gonna empty out way faster and you go back to shooting. So I don't know. Higher frames per second, but locking up and taking forever to write to the card, or slower frames per second and just allowing you to continuously shoot. Number 3, changing between photo, video, and S&Q. So this new lever under the mode dial is awesome, and being able to quickly change between photo and video is super clutch. Also while leaving your mode dial in the same place. So on the A7 III, you have to toggle between the mode dials, and if you want to have aperture priority in video, you'd have to go into the menu and change that. So this is so much faster, it just makes way more sense. And you can also have separate independent settings now for photo and video. That way you don't have to make your changes every time you switch between photo and video like you do on the A7 III. Number 2, real-time tracking in IAF. When I first got the A7 III, I was blown away at how good the eye autofocus was, and honestly, it still is pretty good. But as time has moved on, Sony's autofocus has gotten way better, and the A7 IV has some of the best autofocus found in the A1, so it's amazing. The eye autofocus sticks like glue, it's accurate, it's reliable, and the A7 IV also has real-time tracking that the A7 III doesn't have. So with that real-time tracking, say you were on the eye and it lost it, it would just intelligently jump back to the face or the head. And so this is game-changing for portrait photography, especially if the model's moving around. And that alone is kind of the reason why I want to upgrade to the A7 IV. And that brings us to number 1, and that's the sensor resolution. Sony's dropped a brand new sensor into the A7 IV. It's got a resolution bump of 33 megapixels from 24 megapixels. Obviously it's only 9 megapixels, but it does make a difference for some people, and I think that having that extra resolution is nice. Not only that, it has better color. The color science is way more improved. Honestly, it's got some of the nicest looking JPEGs I've seen out of any camera, and that's me saying that about Fuji all the time. But anyway, that's the top 10 differences and possibly the reasons why you'd upgrade from the A7 III. Hopefully I addressed some of the negativity I've seen online that the people that haven't even used the camera yet are saying. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. It's got some flaws, but I think that it's a pretty good upgrade from the A7 III. Let me know if you're currently shooting with an A7 III or if you're gonna upgrade or you're just gonna go straight to the A7 IV. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, give it a thumbs down twice. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. I'll see you guys in the next one. Another cool feature is focus breathing compensation. This only works on a few G Master lenses, but some of those lenses suffer from heavy focus breathing. So what focus breathing compensation does is that it crops in a little bit on the lens and somehow digitally counters the focus breathing, giving you a really nice smooth focus pull without changing the frame size.